If it's Monday, we have a first-hand look at immigration enforcement efforts underway in Chicago today as President Trump cracks down with thousands of arrests in this country and a ratcheting up of tensions with a key foreign ally. Plus, President Trump and his allies defend his abrupt dismissal of 18 independent government watchdogs, a sweeping move in violation of a federal law that requires Congress to be notified before an IG is fired. And 3 of President Trump's most polarizing cabinet picks are set to face the Senate this week as the White House warns Republicans to get in line behind all of Trump's nominees or face political consequences. And welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Aaron Gilchrist in Washington. President Trump set to meet with House Republicans at one of his Florida golf clubs this afternoon amid questions about how they will tackle his agenda and as the administration ramps up a promised crackdown on undocumented migrants. Immigration enforcement operations are continuing today after federal agents carried out raids this weekend in several major U.S. cities, making nearly 1,000 arrests yesterday alone. U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement says it's made more than 2,600 arrests since Donald Trump took office 1 week ago. 100 agents are fanned out across Chicago as we speak, and that's where Border Czar Tom Homan spoke with my colleague Gabe Gutierrez about the president's plan to marshal the resources of the entire federal government to make good on his campaign promise of mass deportations.
Now that this first week is done, what would you say has been the biggest difference this first week as compared to the Biden administration?
All the government. We got DOD. I've done this since 1984. I started as Border Patrol agent in 1984. To see illegal aliens get on DOD flight heading south, that was the first of me. That shows this president's got all the government into this issue. I came to this task force at CC and all the government, law enforcement, from DOJ and DHS here today, working toward public safety and national security. That is the first. Under President Trump, I've never seen it before.
Now, at a rally in Las Vegas over the weekend, President Trump touted a series of executive orders in his first week, overhauling the nation's border enforcement policies, and he told supporters he was just getting started.
21 million people came in. Many of them are criminals, murderers. Well, we're getting them out. You see it. You see it yesterday, first day. Our message could not be more clear. America's decline is over. American decline is over. Within hours of taking the oath of office, I declared a national emergency at our southern border. I sent active duty troops to the border to help repel the invasion. We immediately halted all illegal entry and began sending every border trespasser and violator back to the places from which they came.
Now, the White House's deportation efforts nearly sparked a trade war this weekend with one of the country's closest allies in South America. That's after Colombia temporarily turned away 2 U.S. military flights returning migrants to that country. Now, Colombia's president posting on social media that, quote, a migrant is not a criminal and should be treated with the dignity a human being deserves. Both leaders threatened tariffs and other retaliatory measures before apparently coming to an agreement to have Colombia accept those deportation flights. NBC News senior White House correspondent Gabe Gutierrez joins me now from Chicago. Also with me is NBC News Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainsley here on set, and NBC News White House correspondent Vaughn Hilliard in Doral, Florida. So, Gabe, I'll start with you here. I understand you just took part in a ride-along with some ICE officers there in Chicago. What'd you see?
Hi there, Aaron. Good afternoon. Well, it just wrapped up a short time ago, and this is one of many targeted enforcement operations happening across the city of Chicago throughout the day. At one point, there were 10 teams of 10 or so federal agents fanned out across the city. And this is something that ICE says that it conducts every single day. But over the last few days, ever since President Trump took office, there's been increasingly more of an emphasis placed on them. Now, yesterday, ICE says nationwide it arrested around 1,000 people. And since President Trump took office a week ago, the agency says that it's arrested more than 2,600. Now, what we saw today, we went out with one of those teams. We did witness one arrest, Aaron, but I will say we were out with him for about 5 hours, and it was a very painstaking process. They took them hours of surveillance and also hours of just door knocking in some cases. However, there was one instance where we saw an undocumented immigrant that ICE says they tried to look for yesterday, didn't find find him at the address they thought he was at home. But today, however, a surveillance team spotted him at work, and that's when they decided to move in, and he was arrested. We then spoke to him at a processing facility on the outskirts of Chicago. ICE says that he had a lengthy criminal record. The immigrant said that some of those charges may have been dropped, although we verified with ICE that they weren't. But this undocumented immigrant now says that he is leaving behind a 5-year-old daughter here in the U.S., and now he faces deportation back to Mexico, Aaron.
Very detailed account there, Gabe. I appreciate that. I do want to ask you to compare for me, if you can. I know you did an ICE ride-along during the Biden administration as well. Did you notice any differences between these two experiences?
That's right. We went along with ICE for another operation in December after President Trump's reelection, but before he had taken office. In that instance, it was in the outskirts of Boston. During the Biden administration, actually the last month for which data is available, back in September, ICE was averaging nearly 300 arrests per day. Now, during the Trump administration, again, I said that they had more than 1,000 arrests on Sunday. There does seem to be significantly higher numbers when it comes to the number of arrests. And then, as well, Aaron, this administration is definitely putting more of a priority on getting that daily tally out there. Aaron?
And Gabe, before I let you go, I know you also spoke with Border Czar Tom Homan yesterday about these ICE operations. We played a little bit of that earlier. Did he acknowledge that not everyone arrested would fall into the category of violent criminal during these raids?
Certainly, and we've been seeing Trump administration officials saying that more and more over the last few days. They've been acknowledging that collateral arrests, and just so we're clear, Aaron, collateral arrests are when these ICE officers go to and look for one of their targets, but in the process of that, they could run across another undocumented immigrant that perhaps does not have a criminal record, but is either in the same house or in the same vicinity, and that's a collateral arrest. During the Biden administration, there were fewer of those, but I even spoke with ICE officers today, and they say that there will be collateral arrests. And in fact, anyone who is in this country illegally should prepare to be deported. And today, though, we did witness one instance where there were some ICE officers going up to a residence. They did knock on the door and they were let inside. They were looking for an undocumented immigrant. They spoke with what they told us were family members inside. It's not clear whether they were undocumented, but either way, ICE officers had the discretion whether or not to potentially take them into custody. They did not, because the people inside the house were cooperative, Aaron.
All right, Gabe Gutierrez for us in Chicago. Some really great observations there, Gabe. Thank you. I want to turn to Julia Ainsley here now and sort of get into the weeds. I know I can do this with you on some of this and how it all works. Gabe touched on it there, but I wonder what happens in the in-between here. We see the images of people being arrested. We see people being marched onto planes to face deportation. But what happens in between for these migrants?
By and large, most of those people are probably not the same people. As we understand it, a lot of the people, especially those on those military flights, had recently crossed the border. So these aren't people that ICE went to go arrest in the middle of U.S. cities. Those who they're arresting in the cities have to then spend some time in ICE detention, that they're transported somewhere on the border. They may have, in that time, a chance to go before an immigration judge and make a case about why they should be in this country and not deported. It's a long process, and it's costly. ICE right now is already looking at a $230 million budget shortfall, and that's under the operations they did under Biden. So as they want to ramp up these arrests, they have to find a place to house them and more planes to deport them.
Well, let's talk about that housing part of this. I mean, they're sending these folks to detention centers for the most part, I would imagine, but eventually, potentially, they could run out of space, right? What happens then?
Yeah, that's right. They're only funded for 41,500 beds, if you want to get into the weeds there. And they want to go to as many as 80,000 or 120,000 beds. So they're working with private prison companies. Those are going to be the big winners from all of this. And they're ramping up space. They're looking at military bases where they could build temporary facilities, basically tent cities to house migrants. None of that comes cheap, and all of that takes time. So it's a question of when you look at these nationwide enforcements, and we are expecting to see it over the week in other cities as well, how long are they going to be able to sustain that? Because you can arrest someone a lot faster than you can build a building.
Yeah, the arrests have been happening. The repatriation flights happened during the Biden administration, although not on military aircraft. Can you sort of compare for us, I guess, the numbers? As you look at the number of arrests that ICE made during the Biden administration versus what we're seeing now?
Well, certainly the arrests have gone up. You're looking at 956 on Sunday. That is a very large number. It's the highest of the Trump administration so far, and that would be a big day for the Biden administration. On average in September, that's the latest month we have full public data for, they arrested 282 migrants per day. So that's quite a jump. That's significant. But the deportations in general haven't jumped that much. For example, there have been 4,000 sent back to Mexico. That's very average for a week under the Biden administration, too. So it's a matter of seeing how quickly they can get these people through a pipeline. So we shouldn't just be looking at arrests. We should also be talking about deportations as well. Well,
let's talk about that then. I mean, we saw what happened over the weekend with Colombia. We know that there were some flights that were slowed down with Mexico as well. Is there concern in the administration about other countries perhaps pushing back or not accepting these repatriation flights?
They would probably say there's not concern because of the big diplomatic muscle that President Trump just flexed over the weekend when he posted on X that he was going to impose tariffs on Colombia and restrict visas for people to be able to come to the U.S. legally from Colombia. And so they would say, look, we have no concerns because we'll just put the full pressure on them. But there is an emergency meeting being called this week by leaders of Latin American nations about how they're going to handle this. They may find that they have strength in numbers, that if they start to push back, they might not have as many of these flights. And we should say Colombia didn't have a problem with the fact that there were Colombian nationals being deported back home. Right. They had a problem with the military flights. They thought that was inhumane. Some of these countries also might not realize that migrants have traditionally been in handcuffs and had shackles around their feet when they flew. That's normal. What's different is the military plane, the look of that.
Yeah, it's a cargo plane.
Of course. Yeah. And if they ever get to a point, and they've talked about this, where they'd start to deport nationals to countries they aren't from. For example, if Venezuela continues to refuse to take back Venezuelans, will they then send those people to somewhere like El Salvador? We'll have to see how all that plays out and what kind of diplomatic pressure the administration could apply there.
Okay, I know you're going to hang with us. I want to turn to Vaughn Hilliard, though, in Florida for us today. Vaughn, the White House is essentially declaring a victory in its brief dispute with Colombia, as we've been talking about. Can we expect to see this administration use these threats of tariffs and sanctions and such to sort of strong arm other allies?
Especially with the swiftness in which the Colombian president stood down on the retaliatory tariffs that he had announced just hours after the United States and President Trump announced their own tariffs on Colombian goods coming to the United States. You saw from Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt suggests that the days of appeasement are over. You saw people like Florida Senator Rick Scott say there's a new sheriff in town. And frankly, all of this happened less than 1 week of Donald Trump's presidency. And that is where you have seen him repeatedly not only threaten, but in his first administration, he put significant tariffs on Mexico and China, and and goods even coming from the EU. And so that is that outstanding question, because Colombia was not necessarily a country that he was audibly and publicly threatening until literally they turned back these 2 military aircrafts. And that is what caught so many off with surprise, was his quickness to turn to tariffs as a way to try to get Colombia to stand down on their resistance to those flights coming back into Colombia.
So then, Vaughn, is there any concern or conversation at least about these threats of tariffs and such leading to higher prices for Americans here?
Absolutely. I mean, if you're looking at just Colombia specifically, there's a large share of imported coffee in the United States comes from Colombia. It makes up almost majority of the market, but also flowers, a great deal of the flower market. And ahead of Valentine's Day, there was one ally of Donald Trump, Katie Miller, who is also the wife of Stephen Miller, the deputy chief of staff, who posted on social media last night that we'll pay more for coffee and flowers, and said thank you. And essentially, they're willing to make those concessions, and that Americans should understand that if their prices are to increase, that they are doing this as part of a longer-term good. Sorry, as music here is starting here in this room here behind me here.
Yeah, I'm going to take that music as my cue to ask you about where you are and what you're there for. You're at the House Republicans retreat there outside Miami. Help us understand what the plan is there today.
Right. This is actually the room where Speaker Mike Johnson and other House Republican leadership just addressed the press here ahead of President Trump, just about 100 yards from where we're standing right now. He's about to deliver remarks in a ballroom here in Doral at the Trump property. This is the retreat, the annual retreat for the House GOP conference. Ahead of them, essentially kicking things into high gear up on Capitol Hill. They will be here through Wednesday. And I want to let you hear a little bit from Speaker Johnson specifically on the tariff and Colombia issue, because you saw him essentially to every single question stand by the president and defend the, in some cases, controversial moves that he's made. Take a listen.
We will move as necessary on any country. This was a message to Colombia and anyone else. You have to participate. You have to take back the illegals who came here that come from your country. And if not, then we will act. Congress will have no daylight between us and the White House on that issue.
And this is where we expect President Trump in about a half hour from now to take the microphone and address the House GOP conference. And so far, with majorities in the Senate and the House, they understand that this period of legislating is going to be so key, especially under the context that who knows what happens in the 2026 midterms. And so this window of being able to effectively not only pass a major legislative package, but also avoid a government shutdown in March and potentially raise the debt ceiling later on this spring, this is a really important time for not only House Republicans, but also for President Trump as well.
All right, Vaughn Hilliard for us in Florida today. Vaughn, thank you. I want to turn back to Julia Ainsley here. Julia, I know we have some breaking news now on action the Justice Department has taken against some former members of the special counsel Jack Smith's team. What do you know?
Well, we know that people who were on Jack Smith's team, which is now looking like it's being dissolved, that they were detailed from other parts of the Justice Department. So these people are now essentially losing their jobs when they were probably expecting just to go back to their other jobs. And they picked some of the best people from the criminal division, from the civil division, to go investigate how Donald Trump may have meddled in trying to obscure the outcome of the 2020 election and his interference in Georgia, as well as how he handled his classified documents, his documents that were found in Mar-a-Lago. So these are people, they were considered civil servants, cream of the crop, not political appointees. Many of them probably served under the first Trump administration as well. Now they're losing their jobs. And this follows a slew of firings we've seen just over the weekend. The firings of at least 12 inspector generals without giving Congress that 30-day heads up. And then last week, also at the Justice Department, they got rid of the 4 top officials who run immigration courts. Sorry, it comes back to immigration again. But also people who were on the Environmental Natural Resources Division now have to be part of a task force to go after sanctuary cities to try to penalize them for not cooperating with ICE. So this is all part of, a realignment around priorities, but it's different and breaking from norms that other presidents have done in the past, where they generally allow career civil servants to stay in their lane and keep doing their work no matter who's in the White House.
We will keep watching to see what else happens. Julia Ainsley for us. We appreciate it, Julia. Thank you. Well, coming up, more on those IG firings Julia just mentioned as one of the fired employees speaks out. That story and the fallout up next. Plus, new developments in the ongoing Israel-Hamas ceasefire. We have new footage of residents returning home to northern Gaza and new details on the conditions of the remaining hostages. We are live in Israel straight ahead. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Despite campaigning on eliminating government fraud and abuse, President Trump this weekend dismissed 18 independent government watchdogs charged with investigating government fraud and abuse. The White House removed inspectors general from nearly every cabinet-level agency, some of whom were appointed by Trump in his first term. The dismissals also appeared to violate a federal law which requires Congress to be given 30 days' notice before a Senate-confirmed IG is fired. The president defended his decision while speaking with reporters aboard Air Force One over the weekend.
It's a very common thing to do. Some people thought that some were unfair or some were not doing the job, and it's a very standard thing to do.
Now, the reaction from Trump's allies on Capitol Hill was, for the most part, differential to the president, despite his apparent violation of federal law. Here are some of the highlights from the Sunday shows.
So ultimately, these inspectors general serve at the pleasure of the president. He wants new people in there. He wants people who focused on getting out waste and fraud and abuse and reforming these agencies.
I'm not overly worried about that. It's not the first time people have come in and put their team in place. When you win an election, you need people in your administration that reflect your views. So I'm not really worried about that.
Do you think he violated the law?
Well, technically, yeah, but he has the authority to do it. So I'm not, losing a whole lot of sleep that he wants to change the personnel out.
Now, the only Senate Republican we spoke to who expressed skepticism of the firings was Maine's Susan Collins, who told us, quote, "I don't understand why one would fire individuals whose mission is to root out waste, fraud, and abuse." NBC News White House correspondent Yamiche Alcindor joins me now. Yamiche, the question a lot of folks have right now is the why of it all, right? Why did Trump fire these independent inspectors general, and is firing them this way legal?
Well, that's two key questions. On the first one, I talked to White House officials over the weekend who told me that these firings were because the Trump administration is, quote, cleaning house and wants to make sure that it's getting rid of anyone who doesn't align with their mission and their priorities. Now, the big question is, how did these IGs not align with their mission and priorities if their job, their responsibilities were to root out waste, fraud, and abuse? And a number of them, really all of them, are supposed to be apolitical. So it's not as if they were serving for one administration or the other. On the question of legality, the law is clear. The White House has to give Congress 30 days notice if they're going to fire an IG, and it also has to give them substantive reasons for doing so. But really, it's going to come down to whether or not lawmakers really care, and in particular, whether or not Republican lawmakers care. And from what we can tell, the GOP is not pushing back on President Trump when it comes to this issue. So it's likely going to be a moot point, and he's likely going to be able to go in and replace them, if he wants to replace them, with people that he wants. Aaron?
Well, I'm going to go back to that point in just a second here, but I'll ask you first, what have we heard from some of these IGs, the folks who've been fired? Are they concerned about what these firings could mean?
Well, they were very concerned based on the conversations that I've had with a number of them. I interviewed one on camera, the former Interior IG. His name is Mark Lee Greenblatt. He was worried about the politicization of the IG offices. Take a listen to what he told me over the weekend.
For example, if a member of the Trump administration is accused of ethics misconduct or some sort of criminal violation, will the IG be willing to investigate that in a fulsome and comprehensive manner? Will they be willing to come to findings, negative findings about that Trump political appointee? That is the key question. That's where the rubber meets the road. The key question is, are they going to be the taxpayers' representatives inside the federal agencies, or are they going to be President Trump's representatives inside the federal agencies? That's the key question.
And Mark Lee Greenblatt also told me that he was appointed under the Trump administration, the first one. So he said he doesn't understand the rhyme or reason and really couldn't understand sort of what the through line was between the IGs that the president ended up firing. We know that the Department of Justice and Department of Homeland Security, their inspectors generals are still in place. But it's really still a question of why exactly he went with those 18 or so IGs. Aaron?
All right, we will have to leave it there for today. Yamiche Alcindor for us near the White House. Yamiche, thank you. And up next, we will head to Capitol Hill, where Senate Republicans are gearing up for a big week of confirmation hearings. That's after being warned by the Trump White House, confirm the rest of the president's picks or face the consequences. You're watching Meet the Press Now. And welcome back. The White House is warning Senate Republicans to fall in line on President Trump's most controversial cabinet picks or face the consequences. Now, this comes after the president's choice for Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, was confirmed by the narrowest of margins on Friday night after 3 Senate Republicans voted against his confirmation because of concerns about his lack of experience. And with some of the president's most controversial picks on Capitol Hill this week, a senior Trump administration official told NBC News its message to Senate Republicans is simple, quote, "It's pass-fail. You either support everyone or you don't. The Senate needs to advise and consent, not advise and adjust." Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Trump's pick for HHS Secretary, will have his first hearing on Wednesday and a second hearing on Thursday, which also will be the day that Kash Patel and Tulsi Gabbard have their hearings, Trump's picks for FBI Director and Director of National Intelligence. My NBC News colleague Sahil Kapur has the latest now from Capitol Hill. He joins us there. Sahil, I want to start with your reporting on this. The White House appears to be sort of flexing some muscle on Republicans in the Senate there. How are they taking this?
Yeah, that's right, Aaron. President Trump is at his moment of maximum political capital right now, and he's spending that capital to try to get these nominees confirmed, including several controversial ones that Republican senators may not prefer to have in the cabinet if it were ultimately up to them. A senior White House official told our colleague Garrett Haake that there is a very well-funded consortium of outside groups and political actors who, this official said, will exact consequences on any Republican who opposes any one of Trump's nominees. They have real leverage here because Trump has significant influence over Republican primary voters who these senators need to get through in order to get renominated before they can get reelected. And it looks like this is where Trump is choosing to make his stand. There are Republican senators who believe ultimately that it is their duty to support Trump's nominees, to vote for them rather, even if they don't ultimately prefer them to be in the cabinet. Take a look at what Senator John Hoeven, the North Dakota Republican, told me, quote, "There is a strong feeling in our caucus that the president gets deference to get his team on the field. The people elected him to do that," unquote. I would say that sums up the views of most Republican senators. Another one told me that some senators are going to draw the line at nominees who sound more like Tucker Carlson than a Republican. This senator went on to say that this is ultimately the future of the country at stake. It's not entertainment television. The senator asked to remain anonymous because they weren't willing to say this publicly. But it kind of gives you an indication of some of the discontent happening underneath the surface here, even if it hasn't risen to the level yet.
You know, we also, Sahil, laid out some of the key hearings that we expect to see this week. What should we expect to see in them? What have you heard from members about these nominees that are up this week?
Yeah, you laid out the biggest ones, and you see them on the screen there. Thursday is going to be a huge day. Those three nominees, RFK Jr., Kash Patel, and Tulsi Gabbard, are all getting their hearings Thursday morning. All happening around the same time. And if you were to pick three nominees who are probably the most embattled at this moment, it would be those three. Now, there are different concerns for each one. For Tulsi Gabbard, it is her past dealings, her past cryptic dealings with the former Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad, including a secret meeting in 2017, her opposition to FISA Section 702, which is a controversial spying power of foreign individuals that a lot of Republican senators support. For RFK Jr., it is his past support for abortion rights that's drawn some opposition, including from a group tied to former Vice President Mike Pence. His views on vaccines are certainly going to come up, although that's more of an issue among Democrats than Republicans. And for Kash Patel, it's questions about his qualifications, past comments he's made on right-wing radio shows about using prosecutorial power against Trump's critics. Aaron.
All right, Sahil Kapur for us on the Hill today. Sahil, thank you. And joining me now on set is Molly Ball, senior political correspondent for the Wall Street Journal, Chuck Rocha, co-host of the Latino Vote podcast and founder of Nuestro PAC, and Jim Garrity, senior political correspondent for National Review and a Washington Post contributing columnist. A lot of ground to cover from what's been going on over the weekend here. Molly, I'll start with you on this. The White House seeming threats to members of the Senate about getting behind these candidates, these nominees that President Trump has put forward. It's advise and consent, not advise and adjust, one of the quotes that we got here. You've covered several administrations. Does this sort of fit with the way things are typically done?
Well, on the one hand, yes, the senators from Trump's party mostly do want him to have his team on the field. However, he is really pushing the boundaries of what they're willing to accept with these particular nominees just because they are so unorthodox, their experience is so unconventional, and their ideology, in the case of the former Democrats especially, is something that the Republican senators are a little bit skeptical of. And I think what we saw with the Hegseth vote over the weekend really tells you that, first of all, there are senators who are pretty immune to these threats, right? A Susan Collins, a Lisa Murkowski, a Mitch McConnell, who's not running again. They're not concerned about a potential primary challenge because of the lay of the land in their states, because they've survived already, or again, just because they're not going to have to run again. And second of all, Trump does have a lot of leverage. He does have the Republican base, but these senators have leverage too. He's going to need their votes again over and over and over throughout the next 4 years. And so if he burns this bridge now and starts going to war and starts primarying people now, what is he going to do next time he needs their vote?
Jim, do you see it that way? I mean, there's the suggestion that Sahil just made here that it could be risky to not vote in line with what President Trump wants. You've got Murkowski, Collins, McConnell in this instance. Do you expect there would be further defections?
Well, with those three having voted against Hegseth, they certainly seem to be at least shaky for the rest of these nominees. Hegseth, remember, at one point, there was so much trouble around the nomination. There was talk about the Trump administration looking at some other alternatives, Ron DeSantis, et cetera. Hegseth went out there, did this kind of press availability, was meeting all the reporters, did the questioning, and managed to win over enough Republicans. And I think they're going to try to do the same thing for Gabbard and for Kennedy. But I think there's a difference. Gabbard and Kennedy are not Republicans, right? And so Hegseth, all kinds of personal issues. He's very young. He's fairly inexperienced. But on most issues, he's a fairly conservative guy. He's probably on the Venn diagram of the typical Republican senator, and Hegseth overlaps a great deal. Gabbard and Kennedy, maybe not so much. And when I hear somebody who sounds more like Tucker Carlson, those are the two that jump out as being, the nominees who sound most likely like a certain formerly bow-tied talk show host.
I'm curious, Chuck, what you think about how Democrats play into all this, right? We saw some Democrats defect with Kristi Noem in that nomination process on the Hill last week. Were you surprised about that? And do you expect that you might see something similar with RFK Jr. and with Tulsi Gabbard?
Well, most of the viewers know that I run campaigns for events, so I look through everything through the lens of politics. And so what you should be paying attention to is, first of all, who's up in 26? Who could get the retribution first? A lot of Democratic vulnerable senators up. Ossoff in Georgia, Peters in Michigan, also the senator in New Hampshire who's worried about a Sununu run. Those are the three. On the opposite side of that, there are no Republicans up of any consequence in 26. And Murkowski's almost bulletproof. She got beat in her primary last time and won as a write-in, and her name is Murkowski. Yeah. I challenge anybody here to spell that out in a write-in. So that's what you should kind of keep in mind. Also, with Tom Tillis, the reason I think that you don't have to worry about him as much as folks think you do is he's up in 26. Donald Trump's sitting on $500 million that he could spend in his pack against anybody.
Molly, I'm curious to get your assessment of week one for the new Trump administration. We heard over and over again during the campaign that success was going to be Donald Trump's retribution. But we've seen this past week that retribution has been retribution as you think about security clearances and Secret Service details. What's your 30,000-foot assessment of week one?
Well, they're definitely moving fast and breaking things, as the tech saying goes. It's a very sort of Silicon Valley-informed approach to things. I think what remains to be seen is how this is all going over with the American public. Polls take a couple weeks to settle in. We know the individual aspects of the things that they've done may be unpopular, but people did want big change in this election. They did want things to change substantially. And so that is definitely what is happening. And, what happened with the stock market today, is that going to cause people to be skeptical of the potential impact on the economy that this administration is having? I think, again, it's going to take a few weeks to settle in. But what I want to know is, do the American people like this or not?
I'm curious about your thoughts around the table about the inspectors general issue, right? The idea of firing 18 inspectors general in this week. And is this about just wanting change, or is it something else that's happening here? Is it a question of if you're either for me or against me as it relates to loyalty with this president?
First of all, my understanding is under the law, you're supposed to give Congress 30 days notice if you are firing an attorney general.
And a good reason.
I guess we're just not going to do that. I guess we're going to ignore that. I will point out, though, as much as I'm enough of a policy wonk and political geek to pay attention to what Inspector General reports are put out when they have good, juicy scandals, by and large, they aren't noticed. Maybe this should be a very big scandal and consequential. I don't think it's going to be that, in part because, as you alluded to, this week it's been a long year, and there's just so much things going on that I suspect that it's like Lucille Ball and the assembly line. Yeah. You can't eat the chocolates fast enough because there are too many scandals and too many controversies coming down the pike.
Electorally, like we were talking about, most voters in America don't know what the inspector generals do, and they don't care. But as Democrats or as an opposition party, you should use this in a line of many things. As Jim was saying, of all the things that are coming, pick out the one that are really going to start showing a pattern of what people really voted for. To Molly's point, poor people voted to get their gas and groceries cheaper, and rich people voted for him because they wanted to see their taxes stay low. None of this is helping, and none of that right now. If you couple that with him enriching himself throughout this presidency, if you can prove that and make the case and say the inspector generals was one of those reasons, then you start giving Democrats and the opposition bait to actually win some elections.
And that's the question, like, how did Democrats, Molly, move in this space now? It seems like, there's been a strongly worded letter, and that's about the extent to which Democrats have tried to step up and do something outside of just sort of complaining about what the president has done so far.
I think, and I'm not here to give anybody political advice. That's
I'll take
his
that
job.
over here.
But I do. But you definitely see Democrats taking a different approach than they did in 2017. The idea being that a decisive mandate was delivered, and so they shouldn't sort of thumb their nose at the voters, and they should be more discriminating about what they oppose. Not everybody agrees with that approach, and there's a lot of disagreement among Democrats about whether they should be more forceful in, say, voting against all of the nominees, for example. But I think it's going to take Democrats a little bit of time to come up with a coherent message, in part because it's going to take time to see what the impact is of all the things that Trump is doing. Something like the inspectors general, as Chuck was saying, do you then have scandals break out? Do you have corruption and stealing? Because that's what the inspectors general are there to prevent. And so is that something that Democrats can then point to and say, see, he took the cop off the beat, and now they're running away with the story, and that's your money.
All right. That is where we will leave it. We're out of time for today. Molly, Chuck, Jim, thank you all. Well, after the break, life in limbo, the impact of President Trump's executive order that halted the U.S. refugee admissions program and what it means for the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan and beyond. You're watching Meet the Press Now. And welcome back. After a breakthrough in the crisis talks to keep the Gaza ceasefire on track, early this morning, Israel opened a checkpoint into northern Gaza. That's allowing tens of thousands of displaced Palestinian civilians to return home. The main coastal road was crowded with civilians carrying the few possessions they have, many of them returning to neighborhoods that were reduced to piles of rubble. Their return to northern Gaza was delayed by more than 48 hours after Israel accused Hamas of breaching the ceasefire agreement by not releasing Arbel Yehud, an Israeli civilian, ahead of the 4 female soldiers who were freed this weekend and reunited with their families this weekend after more than 15 months in captivity. But a deal was struck late yesterday to release her along with 2 other hostages on Thursday and then 3 more hostages on Saturday. Joining me now is Danielle Jin in Israel for us today. So, Danielle, as these Palestinian folks are returning home to northern Gaza, what are they going home to?
Yeah, that's a great question, one many, I think, will be asking. The latest figures suggest 300,000 people returned home today in northern Gaza, and we saw them in the tens of thousands over the weekend waiting for the green light to go ahead. They had sold their tents they were sleeping in the south, and they had whatever belongings survived 16 months of war. And they waited, and finally they were given the go-ahead. And they are going back to, in some cases, family who they've not seen in 16 months, parents and children reunited. Some will discover what, if anything, is still standing from their homes. Many will also be digging for people, loved ones, still buried under the rubble and give them a proper burial. But what everybody is going back to is land, their land. And this, the Palestinians will tell you, they have a history of forced displacement. So the idea that they can go back home, and they have returned back home today, for them is the definition of victory in this conflict.
I can only imagine. We did hear President Trump say that he wants to, quote, clean out the Gaza Strip, and he suggested that Egypt and Jordan take in more Palestinians. What's been the reaction in the region to that?
Well, the Arab League has said that this would amount to ethnic cleansing. Jordan and Egypt have flat out said no. The idea has some support here in Israel among the far-right ministers of Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition government. Bezalel Smotrich specifically, he is a finance minister, according to Israeli media. He's already trying to put this down on paper and see how he can turn this idea into policy. This is the same minister who back in August said that it would be the moral and just thing to do to starve 2 million Palestinians in Gaza. But if you ask Palestinians themselves, I mean, any talk of forcibly being displaced or removed, invokes very painful memories of the 1948 Nakba, what's referred to as the catastrophe in Arabic, when 750,000 Palestinians were forcibly expelled from their homes, which of course led to the creation of Israel in 1948. Some of the Palestinian families still have the keys to their homes. And so many will tell you they would rather die in Gaza than be forced to leave it.
All right, Danielle Jin for us in Israel tonight. Danielle, thank you. Now, under the new Trump administration, the State Department announced on Friday a sweeping and immediate freeze on almost all foreign aid. The 90-day directive provides an exception for Israel and Egypt, which are among the top recipients of U.S. foreign aid, while notably not issuing a similar exception for Ukraine as it nears the 3-year mark of Russia's brutal invasion there. Now, this comes after President Trump signed an executive order hours after taking office, abruptly suspending the U.S. refugee resettlement program. That executive order, which goes into effect today, is leaving many refugees in limbo, including tens of thousands of Afghan refugees who served alongside U.S. troops in Afghanistan. Joining me now here on set is Sean Vandiver, founder and president of Afghan Evac, a coalition of organizations helping to resettle Afghan refugees here in the U.S. Sean, we appreciate you coming in to help us understand what's going on here. Can you put this executive order in real terms for folks, what it actually means? What does it mean for Afghan refugees who worked alongside U.S. service members?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me on today. And look, I can put it into lots of different real terms, right? It means that a buddy of mine who is a active duty U.S. service member, his sister can't come here. He's a paratrooper in the 82nd Airborne, serving our country, proud to serve our country. It means that folks that partner forces who served alongside folks like National Security Advisor Mike Waltz cannot come here because refugees have been paused. It also means that the special immigrant visa holders who have waited 3.5 years, all of these people have waited years and years and years. Special immigrant visa holders have been waiting for years to come here, and we told them on Friday that their American dreams have been dashed.
Can you remind us what risks people face if they have to remain in Afghanistan under Taliban rule, or if they have to be in places like Pakistan where they're waiting there to get into the U.S.?
Sure. So last year, House Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Brian Mast hosted a roundtable on Taliban reprisals. And there were stories told about all these different people that were being hunted down and killed because of their association with us. All of those people are in danger now. And now Chairman Mast is in a position to do something about it, and we know that he cares about this. So we think, actually, that this was a mistake. We believe that this was unintended consequences of these broad sweeping orders. We wrote a letter before the administration took over warning of this. But, you know, in a new administration, there's lots of growing pains. So we hope that National Security Advisor Waltz, Chairman Mast, and a litany of other Republicans who have made very clear their feelings about how the withdrawal went and how we must stand by our Afghan allies. We hope that they'll be calling President Trump and letting him know how important it is that we get this right. Well,
you are here in Washington. Have you been able to have any discussions with folks at the White House, with lawmakers on the Hill? Have you been able to send a message? What is your message for policymakers?
Listen, we've been meeting with folks on the Hill. We've been meeting with folks in the administration, on the outskirts of the administration, making sure that everybody who can influence President Trump and Secretary Rubio know that we need them both to take action. On the aid pause, which has resulted in things like we had to construct a diaper underground railroad because the U.S. government made the provider at a U.S. government facility in Qatar stop distributing diapers. We had to essentially create an aid underground railroad, which we hadn't had to do since August 2021. What we want from the president is a exemption for Afghan relocation work for the U.S. RAP aid pause. What Secretary Rubio could do today is exempt Afghans from this aid pause, both platform operations in third countries around the world, which is allowing SIVs and refugees to come here, as well as the resettlement and placement. So people who are arriving in our country, they should be able to get resettlement benefits and get housing and jobs and school. They can't now because of all of this.
I want to play something that Vice President Vance said yesterday about the refugee program. Listen, watch this.
I don't agree that all these immigrants or all these refugees have been properly vetted. In fact, we know that there are cases of people who allegedly were properly vetted and then were literally planning terrorist attacks on our country. That happened during the campaign, if you may remember. So clearly not all of these foreign nationals have been properly vetted.
But there are 30,000 people in the pipeline, Afghan refugees.
But my primary concern as the vice president, Margaret, is to look after the American people. And now that we know that we have vetting problems with a lot of these refugee programs, we absolutely cannot unleash thousands of unvetted people into our country.
These people
it's
are
not
vetted.
good.
That was a very particular case. It wasn't clear if he was radicalized when he got here or while he was living here.
I don't really care, Margaret. I don't want that person in my country, and I think most Americans agree with me.
So what's your, and to be clear, these refugees do go through a thorough vetting process, but what is your response to what the vice president said there?
Sure. So the vice president is either confused or conflating the different types of folks. There were folks that came here in a hurry in August of 2021, and IGs identified that there were challenges, and the Biden administration deported a bunch of those folks. Everybody who comes here under the USRAP or SIV programs are vetted. In fact, the USRAP is vetted secure, legal immigration. That's the kind of immigration that Vice President Vance wants, right? These are things that if the military is focused on America first, they shouldn't have to worry about this sort of thing. So I would invite the Vice President to call me. I can set him straight on this nuanced and complex issue, but he's confused here.
Just a few seconds left. I know that your organization has helped to resettle thousands of refugees from Afghanistan. How are they doing today?
They're terrible. People are panicking that their families are going to get to come here. On 2 Fridays ago, I got to see what was probably one of the last family reunifications, and we hope that we'll get started again soon. But I got to see a man reunify with his 3.5-year-old son after 3.5 years. Can you believe it? The weight of that baby on him, he was delighted to see him, but the reality is people are worried that they're not going to be able to get to the American dream that we promised them, and we owe it to our national security to deliver on the promises that we make, and our promises cannot be conditional or temporary. They have to be real.
All right, Sean Vandiver from Afghan Evac, we appreciate you being here today. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
And still to come, 80 years after the liberation of Auschwitz concentration camps, remembering one of the darkest chapters in human history and the ongoing work to preserve the powerful stories of the survivors. A live report from Poland is next. You're watching Meet the Press now. Today, the world marks 80 years since the liberation of Auschwitz. World leaders and a dwindling number of survivors gathered at the site of the Nazi extermination camp where 1.1 million people, most of them Jews, were brutally murdered. Elderly survivors, some wearing blue and white striped scars reminiscent of their prison uniforms, walked together to what's known as the Death Wall, a site where thousands of prisoners were executed by firing squads. Roughly 1,000 people who lived through the horrors of Auschwitz are still alive, and today's ceremony marks what will likely be the last time a notable number of survivors can attend an observance like this. The anniversary comes as we see a global rise in anti-Semitism. A new survey shows that 16% of Americans and 26% of 18 to 29-year-olds disagree that the Holocaust happened or disagree that the number of Jews who were killed in the Holocaust has been accurately described. NBC News correspondent Jesse Kirsch joins us now from Poland. Jesse, talk to us about what it was like being there at Auschwitz today.
Yeah, and Aaron, I'll give you the context of where I am right now. So we are right near Auschwitz II Birkenau, which was the larger part of the camp complex where many of the gas chamber deaths and bodies being burned occurred. And where I'm standing, you can see behind me are 2 original historic cattle cars. These were the kinds of train cars that hundreds of thousands of Jewish people were transported on. No ventilation, no bathroom. They weren't given any food. And this area is what's known as the Jew ramp. And this just speaks to the depravity of the Nazis. They would have these people get off of the trains, and then families would be separated forever in what was known as the selection. If you were physically fit and able, you might have a chance of surviving, at least temporarily, because the reality is they planned for everyone to die. It was just a question of if you were going to die slowly through starvation and disease, or if you were going to be immediately sent to the gas chambers. Children, the elderly, the disabled, instantly sent to the gas chambers. And that is the kind of situation that played out again and again for hundreds of thousands of families. In all, over 1 million people were murdered at this concentration camp, most of them Jews, but also Poles, Soviet POWs, the Roma and Sinti, gay men amongst those who were persecuted by the Nazis and their collaborators. I've seen a lot of these images throughout my life. What has really stuck out to me, to answer your question from before, Aaron, is getting to see some of the artifacts up close. In particular, what is burned into my mind now is the thought of looking at the piles of hair they have here. It's something we are told not to photograph out of respect for the victims, but it just speaks to the way that the humanity was ripped away from countless people, and there are just so many lives that were cut short just years into their life. There are also little children's shoes. So just all of these images speak to the fact that there was no age limit that was off, or age group that was off limits. There was no illness that was off limits. If you were Jewish, you were to be killed. And that is what this place was all about. And now it is all just evidence of that. And we had all these survivors here today worried about what they're seeing in the world today and how it reminds them of the past, Aaron.
Yeah. And I know you did an interview with one of those survivors. I encourage people to go to NBCnews.com to see some of that interview. Jesse Kirsch for us live in Poland today. Jesse, thank you. We are back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now, but the news continues with Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.